Faryal is the founder and CEO of HRX Connect. And has always been passionate about helping businesses thrive by creating stronger, high performing, and more engaged teams and cultures. She spent the past 8 years building the proven frameworks and strategies to achieve this. She decided to launch her own business, HRX Connect, to help more firms looking to significantly improve their HR strategies, grow their business, and improve overall company culture. Faryal, thank you so much for being here with us today, and I welcome you to begin the session.
Thank you. I want to start off by saying thank you, everyone. Welcome. I'm really excited to be facilitating this session with everyone. Just echoing back to what Alina said, I'm a YorkU alumni myself, graduated, and so thank you for space for giving me this opportunity to the point of this workshop. And I hope everybody can see my screen because I do have some glitches. So in case you're unable to see anything or I am paused, I would request Gurmeher or Alina to just point it out to me. But it's to keep this interactive, hopefully allowing you guys to enter the new year with a really good workforce planning into some of the strategies, some of the in-depth topics that I will be covering for today. I started this with the goal of exactly what Alina covered, is to help more startups, scale-ups, and SMBs fill in the gap of the HR function until they feel that they are ready to onboard an HR person on a full-time basis in-house. So really happy to be conducting that. I have Q&As in between because I do want you guys to ask your questions and not just be listening to me as the host for today. Starting off with what is HR, I think it's very critical for us to kind of cover what the function of HR is. Pre-COVID, it was seen more as like an administrative department, as some of you may or may not agree, depending on what industries you were a part of or which organizations you were with when you were working on a full-time basis. It was very payroll focused, administrative, health benefits, of course, and who doesn't love pizza, but a lot of association to pizza parties. The function of HR has shifted a lot more. It's viewed more as like a strategic partner. It is accepted more as a strategic partner and function within the organization because it ties into employee relations, which is tied into behavior. How do you show up for each other? How is that tied into your culture? Compliance, super critical, especially for the founders that may be operating not just nationally, but also internationally. What is the difference between independent contractors, your employees? Have you vetted your agreements with lawyers, and are they shared before your employees actually start their functions within your organization? Talent management, that's more tied into not necessarily your recruitment functions only, but how do you onboard? How do you retain this talent? How do you keep them engaged? How are they aligned with the vision of your organization? These are a lot of fundamentals that you, as the leaders, as the founder, co-founders, really the founding team member of an organization, need to establish before you scale, not just with your product, but also team members. And then, of course, compensation and benefits. It's not just as simple as, well, I've put a job posting out there and this is what I think, or this is what I feel that this role or title should be sitting at, but there's also a level of analysis that you should be doing. We all can agree that when you start in an early stage startup, especially if you are bootstrapped, a little bit into revenue, no funding, and you may not always qualify for grants that are available, is how do I retain and how do I attract the level of talent that I'm looking for by keeping other intangible effects, which is tied into your culture and employer branding, and we will cover that throughout the slides. So covering today HR best practices, I call them HR best practices because universally, regardless of, again, where you're operating from, where your workforce is, these are applicable all across. So culture, employee pulse checks, we will go over the differences between what employee pulse checks are and what performance management is, keeping employees aligned with your vision. That is your core responsibility as a founder, because that creates that level of belonging, that level of retention, that level of excitement that I have a purpose working towards something. One thing that I highlight to a lot of founders is you can be obsessed and set over your vision and mission, but you should be attached adaptable towards the journey and the path getting to that vision. And we'll cover that throughout the slides as well. Operational efficiency is extremely critical. This is not meant to get things complicated or necessarily fancy or recommend to get on a whole bunch of platforms. So some of us may be able to relate to it or not. Platform fatigue is another concept that you should be very well aware of. And then super critical, again, talent management. It is not just one function of job description and onboarding, and I have these set number of employees now. How do you manage that? How do you increase your retention rate? How do you reduce your turnover rate, should you have any? And what are some of the tactics that you should be looking into? And I can relate to it myself. Although we run, of course, a fractional HR agency, we are a lot of the functions similar to any startup out there is, how do I define the tone of my culture? What is culture? And so we're going to start with culture starts from day one. There is a notion behind like, well, when I'm at set level of like employees, I'm going to be looking into ABCD. What founders oftentimes don't realize is that you're actually increasing the cost to working your way back. Startups have the highest attrition due to various factors, and this is from like Forbes 2024, so very recent. And some may be able to relate to this and not. What is critical to define is strong leaderships. Are your leaders fostering innovation and collaboration? Do you have a clear purpose and objective? And that again ties back into not just the vision, but also to what the goal and the purpose is of this individual that you have brought on board now. Shared goals. Does every member's objective achieve the company's goals? It's very critical to not just align it with the job sole function of what it is that they're bringing into, but tying it together with intradepartmental figures as well. Effective communication, and this is probably one of my favorite topics, so to say, to cover, because a lot of the times the concept is like, well, I've sent an email or I've sent, a ping through like Team Slack channel, or well, we just had a meeting the other day. Effective communication means day in and out, just keeping a tab on each other. Is there a level of transparency? Were the objectives that have been agreed upon mutually discussed, or is it more like blindsided or cornered that this is what I expect you to get done within the next 3 days? It's understood, and we encourage and recommend founders from the get-go to have this level of communication with the talent that you're engaging with, because you set clear expectations and it increases the level of transparency so that they're mentally prepared and know the type of work environment that they are getting into. But being clear about these are the expectations that has been agreed upon, because your goal at the end of the day is to set the talent that you brought on board for success. And that will increase to your retention, that will increase to setting the tone that although I am a part of a startup, and there isn't necessarily always a structure, but I do have the level of support that I need. I have the level of encouragement that I need from my like leaders, and that kind of sets the tone for your culture again from like day one. Adaptability, super critical to look also for soft skills as you're trying to like build your team out. Is your team agile to respond to change? Are they versatile? Do they have grit? Are they able to like in different functions, jack of all trades? Yes, but are they able to like multitask without the quality of the work suffering? Uh, just quick note, I am unable to see any faces. So if there is any like hands up or thumbs up, I'm unable to like see that. So when I have the Q&A, I'll minimize my screen, and then we can engage with that. Continuing culture. Culture is not just a set of, again, compensation, because legally, of course, you have to pay your employees, or vacation, or you have benefits in place. A lot of the things are tied into legally what the Employment Standards Act requires you to do within Canada, of course. It's really showing up for your team. When you are small, there is very limited things that you can do from a monetary perspective. So giving that fancy package that they may be able to get at an enterprise or an established organization. It's going above and beyond. And what I mean by that, support their partner in a job search. If they have a partner and you have a network that you can tap into, it's something that you can do, and that creates that level of like support that also gives them the security of, now I have a dual income, and so they don't have to be hesitant about, well, I don't really know about my job security because it is a startup, and on top of that I have a partner who is looking for employment at the moment. ensure that they can rely on you. This is super, super critical. Room for mistake, which leads to growth. Yes, there is very little margin in startups to make mistakes, but you also want to build that level of confidence so your team members are able to confide in you. And oftentimes with startups, as a lot of you may relate to, you don't have the function of HR. You don't have the function of what I call is a glass door ceiling effect between you and your employees, that they have someone that they can go to seek comfort if there's anything that they may be frustrated about. So you want to make sure that you are that point of contact, and you're able to support them. Oftentimes, if you take your own examples as well, we've grown the most through mistakes. Just ensure that there are pulse checks thereafter set in place, and obviously preventative mechanisms, but make sure that you give them the level of confidence that you are there if in the event there is a mistake that's made. And that ties back into, of course, setting the tone for your culture. Make sure that they don't miss any personal events. Could be family, and if they have kids, then they want to be a part of that. It's very tough to create that work-life balance, no doubt, in startups, for yourself, in addition to the employees and team members that are now a part of your organization, your vision and mission. What I recommend, instead of necessarily maybe not using the term work-life balance, is harmony, and just giving them that level of autonomy, or just respecting the time off that they have taken, especially if they've notified you of that in advance. Try to delegate the tasks, try to get any type of communication that you need from them, because having a productive employee, charged up employee, is a lot more useful to you than something that could lead to burnout. And towards the last slides, I would love to touch base a little bit more upon burnout and just check-ins with yourself as a founder, not just necessarily with your team. Recognition programs for internal competitiveness. This does not, again, necessarily always mean that you have to get fancy with your compensation packages, but just maybe monthly announcements about employee of the month, star of the month. You can get very creative with how you utilize that. Shout outs within Tuesday Tacos. I don't know if anyone is familiar with that. Pretty economical option, leads to like rewards, a collection of like rewards that you can later redeem, and it kind of encourages team members to support each other and recognize the work that they're doing, which ties into empathy, because that's also something that you want to really think about intra-departmentally, of creating that level of empathy, that sales is working on this and engineering is working on this, and how do I bridge the gap between the two to avoid miscommunication. Q&A. So over here, if wants to chime in, I will hear your feedback. How do you show up? The two previous slides that we talked about, is this something that you already have in place? Is there a culture where you feel like confident enough, this is something that I want to showcase? I would love to hear that from you guys. And different perspectives would probably encourage other founders to share their experiences or just thought processes as well.
Sorry, Farrell, can you pull up the slide which has had the questions, or you can just repeat the questions?
Yes. Are you guys able to see?
Yeah, there you go. We can see the questions now.
Yes. So how do you show up for your team? And that's based on what we just talked about, is just being there for them. Is there anything that you've done that you feel like was not really traditionally based on how culture has been defined? Anything that you would like to share with other founders that may have benefited you and you think could benefit others that are part of this session as well? Would love to hear it from anyone.
I can
Mark.
go ahead. Can you hear me clearly? Great.
Yes.
So, so although I'm an army of one as a solo founder, I do have and do work with others in person. And sometimes it's the little things that make the biggest difference in the team. Like I buy them food, I treat them to food. I help make events and functions a lot more enjoyable by having ways to prepare to participate, consume content, and then I actually work with them, like my digital marketing interns, to work with them to prepare all of the content to publish. And I also listen to and take a lot of their input and advice So they're not only validated, but their ideas get pushed out there because at the end of the day, I certainly can't do everything and I shouldn't. And I also, I look to them for their input, because that's how they learn and grow as well. So that's just some of the things that I do.
And I absolutely loved, and thank you for sharing that, Mike. Mark, I appreciate that. And just echoing back what you said, it's so critical to, and I think I have a slide where we are going to cover that as well, as when you do take in their feedback, what are your action steps? Because that really creates that sense of belonging, but also to create that environment that I shared something and it was taken into consideration. And of course, some things take a little bit longer to be implemented, but it just gives them that confidence that my organization actually listens to me regardless of the stage that we are at. And that attributes to your retention rate, which is super critical. Thank you. Anyone else that would like to go next? Or if you want to answer what has defined your culture, that's great too. And again, this is meant to be an interactive session. So if you, as founders, something that's benefited you, you want to share it, it would be super meaningful.
Austin, go for it.
And if not, no. Okay.
Yeah, can
I
you
was
hear
going
me?
to say, if not, it's okay. Normally I pick on someone with my team, but I won't do
Yeah,
that today.
I'm getting ahead of that by sharing now. So yeah, I mean, I'm a solo founder as well, but I have experience managing teams. So on those teams, I think generally, yeah, just like little gestures. I think Mark mentioned like, grabbing a coffee or just little things that you show appreciation for a friend or someone, things like that go a long way. I think soliciting feedback and like creating opportunity and safe spaces for your team to share how they feel is good. In my experience, it can be tricky to crack that nut because you can't just ask like, "Hey, do you have any problems with me or others?" or like things like
Yeah.
that. They're not really gonna um, tell you. So sometimes you have to ask in certain ways or set up a structure that you kind of
Right.
can read between the lines and get the information that you need. Um, for example, I had like a session I'd set up with a team where we just go through like our wins and challenges for the past week. And you hear about the wins and it also helps you understand what motivates them or what excites them. When they talk about their wins, and then for their challenges, they might might not come right out and say what the issue was, but you can start figuring out like how you might be able to support them. So just finding ways to get that feedback. And yeah, that was kind of two things that I would do to try to build a bit of a culture and help the team feel supported.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Austin. And again, echoing, just creating that safe environment, just covering in that previous slide as well, where you allow room for mistakes and growth is just going to make that relationship with you and your founding team members stronger. And I think Natalia also dropped something amazing in the channel, which is just figuring out the love language. So every person, of course, and when you are smaller, it is easier for you to do this, but at scale, it's a little bit tougher. But perfect opportunity just to see who wants to be appreciated in what manner. And so it's very different to do that depending on who you are dealing with. Something great that you touched upon, Austin, so covering that, which is the employee pulse checks. This is very different than performance management. So I will cover performance management later down in our slides, but probably one of my favorite things to implement when we start working with our clients. Why? It promotes transparency. It promotes trust and open communication just by focusing on the feedback that is collected. And of course, there's a way of implementing this, and you also have to test it out, trial and error, what strategies will work for you. This also creates the accountability that you want for your employees. So it's not just with the expectation of, I have hired you for role A, and so I expect you to do these responsibilities that were shared with you during the interview or like a part of your offer letter, but also creating that within the organizations post their onboarding. It's one thing to assume, well, you are a specialist, so I expect you to kind of know it. It's another thing to ensure, do you have clarity Are you comfortable? Is there anything that you're struggling with? Are you confused? Because in a startup, depending on who you are hiring, there's hesitations. You may have had just a fresh graduate, so they're not really used to, the environment or the culture, that it is okay for me to ask my manager. And then you are the founder, so they may look at you in a completely different light. And all of that goes back into creating that safe space and environment where you are approachable and they can come to you with any type of concerns, especially in the absence of an HR. Proactive. So you may sense something, could be on the basis of a gut feeling, could be on the basis of like, well, it's not really working out based on like what I hired them for, or the role. What could be the reasons? And if you have managers or other founding team members that are involved, is the environment perhaps too toxic, or other contributing factors to it? Use the feedback. Super, super critical. I think both of you that shared your examples, it's extremely important to note that when you are collecting feedback, what are the actionable steps to take thereafter? And did you communicate that with the member? That could be a positive thing that they shared that you could implement because they did it at a previous organization, another startup perhaps that they were a part of, or if it's something that was concerning, if it's being looked into, please ensure that you communicate this to them. You don't want them to feel neglected, and you also don't want them to feel like, well, anytime I come up with something, it's never looked into, it's overlooked, or I get a response eight months down the line. And again, depending on what the scenario or the situation is, everything will have a different timeline in terms of how you are looking into it. Pulse checks could vary in terms of how frequent you want to put them into place. It could be every month, it could be every 60 days, it could be quarterly. It is recommended on a monthly basis, especially when you onboard. I would do it within the first week or 2 weeks, depending on what your capabilities of a timeline perspective are. If you are not directly managing the employee that you just hired, and there is a hiring manager that was responsible for doing that, ensure that they set up this time just to provide them the necessary feedback to help them set up for success, because that is your goal. At the end of the day, you hired them in order for you to succeed with your vision and the mission of your organization. And also collect feedback if there is anything that they can improve, that you can improve upon as an organization. I remember for one of our clients in cybersecurity, they had a very lengthy process of technical assessments, policies that needed to be reviewed, and so their time frame was 2 weeks. And so when I started putting in these employee pulse checks within the employees to collect feedback, what is something that we could have done differently and better? So be open towards constructive feedback as a founder as well. Is the feedback was it was just too much in like 2 weeks, because you're settling into your roles and then you have these tight deadlines to meet as well, and you feel overwhelmed, which also means you were not necessarily absorbing the information or of the assessments that you were conducting. So instead of 2 weeks, we then changed it to 4 weeks, and that led to the other employees that joined thereafter not to feel overwhelmed and go through the same experience. So collecting feedback is one thing, just making sure that you put in actionable steps into addressing those is as critical. What is your employee pulse check? Again, hint, it is not the same as performance review. If anybody wants to chime in, share some feedback as to how they may, if you have an employee pulse check, you may call it something completely different, but is there something that you are currently doing within your organization just to keep tabs of how your employees are doing? And again, this is associated to that level of belonging, the level of satisfaction, more emotionally rather than performance management, which is directly tied into their role and what they are hired for and the KPIs that you determine. Anyone?
Can you open the question screen again, maybe?
Yes. What's your employee pulse check based on the previous slides that we just covered? Is there something that you may have in place? Again, it does not have to be an employee pulse check titled as such, but is there a practice similar to what we just covered that you may already have implemented within your organization?
I think I can start off really quick as well before, or actually, Mark, go ahead.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I'll go after Mark.
Yeah, so
I love that, Mark.
So yeah, my employee pulse check is we have especially with interns, we have a midpoint review where I review them and they also review me. I get a report card and so do they. And even before then, I always tell them I have an open door policy. At any time of day, you can send me WhatsApp or an email, and I will respond at my next availability, no matter what it is. If you can't make it, you can't make it. So be it. It's not the end of the world. So by having an open door policy, I leave lots of room for those kind of check-ins, and I also try to schedule these kind of conversations over lunch or coffee or something where we're together in person and we can have these conversations. So how's it
Yeah.
going? And is there anything I can do to help you? Are there any skills gaps that you need? So I try to really fish for what they need and I try to see how I can help
Right.
get them or close those gaps.
Right. And I love that, and that keeps that level of interactive, I guess, engagement. And some of the previous point that we talked about, it's not just the one way I, as an employer or a startup or your manager perhaps, am here to like give you feedback, but it is also how can we further improve? And I think that gives them even more confidence, at the same time motivation that my voice counts. Everyone wants to matter, whether you're working in a startup as an employee or an enterprise. You want to make sure that you've done something meaningful at the end of the day. Another thing that I'll drop over here before we move on to the next slide is an NPS. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's a little bit more of a complicated process to discuss. So happy to take it with some of you offline if you're interested in it. Net Promoter Score. Recommended to do it every 6 months or at least once a year. It's not anonymous, and this is kind of giving you a pulse on like the emotional well-being of your organization. It could be a question as simple as, how likely are you to recommend someone else in our organization to work? And 7 is normally, on a scale of 1 to 10, 7 is normally what you're looking for. And if so, anyone has submitted a score below that, it's probably someone that you want to do a pulse check with, just to see where things are standing at and why they give you that score. So I think my screen is lagging a little bit, so I'm just going to wait for the next slide to load. So I guess we talked about it, the NPS, so surveys, quick polls. In a lot of the chat channels, Google Chat, for example, you can download a poll and just put it in there. Microsoft Teams has their own, and of course, end of project reviews. And so end of project reviews is sometimes you've accomplished something really big and you just want to check in with them to ensure that they're not burnt out. And again, to improve your own processes, what is something that you think we could have done differently? What was the learning lesson? Because at the same time, you're trying to encourage them to learn as well and not become a hamster in the loop type of a process. There's always room for improvement, especially when it comes to operational efficiencies. Keeping employees aligned on vision, super, super critical. It's the vision of the company that ties everyone kind of like unified and united, but what are you doing in order to keep them aligned? And what the benefits are of this, of course, is it drives purpose and engagement. So talking about your vision, relating it back to, stats and other readings that you are stumbling upon, so that it keeps them motivated and engaged as to, we are in the right industry, or we are working in the right product, or the next launch that we have is going to enable us either with this number of acquisitions in clients, or perhaps our sales numbers are going to be sitting at XYZ. This is super critical in a startup because you're trying to also create that sense of security, because it's very iffy for them. And especially if it's someone that just started out their career, or someone that may be a little bit tired of the enterprise corporate world and took their risks and chances on a startup, and they're actually becoming a critical member. Your employees are your assets, and at the end of the day, especially your founding team members, is how do you drive that? It also enhances decision making, because now everyone is clear about, this is our vision, this is the mission, what is our roadmap getting into that? And reiterating again something that I said, being set on your vision and mission is one thing, but you have to be adaptable enough, the journey to that vision, in order to make certain changes as they come along. And especially in this fast-paced tech era with AI and so many other tools out there. How do you stay ahead of the game? It strengthens your team cohesion, of course, and it improves retention and loyalty tremendously because everyone is talking about the alignment and working towards the same goal, which is the vision of your organization. Communicate the vision regularly. The first question should be, do you have town halls? If you don't, highly recommended to put something like this in place, have different agendas that you are going to be talking about. Minimum, again, recommended to do this every quarterly. If you are unable to do it every quarterly, at least every 6 months. And so that brings the alignment together again towards your vision, which is super, super critical. We live in a hybrid, we live in a remote world. You may have national teams across Canada or global teams. And so how do you bring everybody together, aside from obviously the products that they may be working on, the features that they're working on, and different departments as well. And Town Hall is one of those functions that really brings the team together and aligned. Embedded vision in your culture, so performance reviews, recognition programs, some of the things that we talked about earlier on, these are critical so that it kind of proves and showcases the fact that, okay, we are going towards the right vision with the roadmap, hopefully, that you have in place. Operational efficiencies. This one is really important to look into, especially as you are starting out new. Some people are a fan of automating as much as possible, and so they may be more knowledgeable about certain tools. Some of you may come from a background where you have had previous experience of the tools that you have used in your organization when you were working on a full-time basis before you started off on like your new journey. But it's very important to kind of assess, okay, how are we functioning operationally, and what are some of the tools that we may use, even though it may look like a cost from a platform perspective. However, at the same time, it's also saving us a lot with the manual work that we may be doing, because the goal for you is to centralize your data management. And of course, super, super critical, the communication. So who knows the status of the project details? Where do the documents live and who has access to them? Do you have a project management tool? Is it necessary? Because platform fatigue, super critical to keep that in mind as well, is your goal is also to minimize that to the best of your capabilities. What can you automate? What should you automate? What is the project task and how is that being communicated? These are not paid advertisements. We have no partnerships or agreements, just some of the common tools out there that some of you may already use. Slack, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Google Chat. If you are using Gmail, Google Chat has a lot of great features, so you don't necessarily have to opt in for an additional tool such as Slack unless there's specific functions that make sense to you to utilize it, but try to keep it as centralized as possible. Collaboration and like document sharing, SharePoint with Outlook, Google Workspaces. If you are using Gmail, a lot of really good tools depending on which plan that you opt in for that you can utilize. CRMs, so Soho, HubSpot, AppSumo. AppSumo is, some of you may or may not be familiar with it. It's not just to find CRMs, but it's a vast platform of like a lot of options. Not really sure how to like best describe that, but you find like lifetime deals on there, and some of them work really well. Perhaps Hootsuite, a lot of you may be familiar with that. There's something similar to that, Social Pilot. You pay around, I believe, 99 USD one time, and it gives you the same function as what, for example, Hootsuite do, which charges you on a month-over-month basis. They also have a great refund process within that, and what it allows you to do also is test out some of the tools, because HubSpot is pretty pricey, but it also has most of the features and functions that you're using. But before you graduate to HubSpot, depending on what you have reached from a sales perspective, and if that is the need of the hour for your organization, you will get yourself familiar, because introducing tools, remind yourself that it also takes people time to develop those habits and start utilizing that. So maybe you could start small and then build your way up from that. Financial management, so QuickBooks, they also have a payroll function within that. Not a huge fan of it, but everyone has their own preferences. FreshBooks, again, more for like invoicing purposes. They don't have a payroll function as of yet, but there is a lot of other ones. Wave Accounting that has payroll as well as invoices. Again, the goal and then the reason why I'm covering these is to help you keep your platforms of the ones that you need more centralized without adding to the platform fatigue. And then project management, so Notion, Asana, Monday, Rike, ClickUp, Trello, again, depending on who the team members are, what the functions are. You should do your research, have a comparison between at least the top three. And then based on what the need of your organization is, you can make your choices on the basis of that. So don't just recommend and think like, oh, we are introducing a tool, so everyone is going to become more efficient. A tool is meant to help you, not necessarily replace anything. It's smart, not wise. And so you still need your people to be comfortable with it. Again, a poll is super helpful. If you are planning on introducing a tool, your goal is to have as many people as possible buying into it. Perhaps a quick poll of like, this is what we're planning on using. What are your thoughts around it? And so if there is more votes on one select tool, then that's probably the one that you can go with because you'll have more people using it within your organization. What is the issue? So this is a scenario. Would love some of you guys to be able to answer it. During team meetings, as you may have noticed, everyone takes kind of like, their own notes and tasks. And bear in mind, this is before you having implemented any type of like a tool. It's just a team meeting that you're going to have, and everyone is meant to give updates on the progress of the thing. So normally these type of meetings where it is a weekly, monthly, bi-weekly, ends on a high note. Now, the next time you are meeting up for all the discussions that you've had, so one was the progress update, one is like, these are the next tasks that are due. You've noticed the recurring issue. Whenever that meeting comes up, some of the tasks remain incomplete. Everyone has a different way of like working, and in startups, things do change, especially when it comes to like product features. One week you would be working on point A, and then suddenly the next week everything has changed. And so tasks are incomplete or like missed. Hint, everyone is taking their own note. What do you think is the issue here? And if you have encountered an issue similar to that, again, would love to hear it from you. What were some of the, I guess, preventative mechanisms that you've put in place? And I'll keep it on this slide because I know it's a lengthier scenario.
I see Austin raise his hand. So Austin, do you have a question?
Okay, yeah, I can't see it. So great. Thank you, Austin.
Oh, sorry. Are we like giving what we think is the issue? Or
yeah, what do you think is the issue? And
yeah,
if you had
okay.
an issue similar to this, what did you do to resolve it?
Oh yeah. So if it seems that happens a lot. That's a very common problem. You have to delegate someone so there's a few ways you can do it. Um, Probably if you asked me 6 months ago, it would be make sure you have someone assigned to take notes, to document things, and then send out like a report to everybody. You'd also need some kind of person who's making sure that people are staying on track with things. So you kind of have to delegate that in a smaller team. You don't have like a dedicated project manager, but you have to kind of find some accountability. Nowadays, AI tool to just add that AI tool to the meeting, document everything, sends out the notes, sends out the action items, and you still would probably want someone to kind of own that, but it's a lot less work for that person who's been assigned. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Austin. And I'm just smiling throughout because that was literally what I was going to like cover. So I love that you've already experienced it. And just echoing back something that you said, it's very tough, especially when you're a startup, you're lean, you're always running on like, smaller teams, how to be efficient. And so having a project manager in that function, to your point, is a luxury to like have. And so there are tools that you can put in place. So again, the operational efficiencies. Any AI tools that you recommend that you found useful?
Yeah, I'm like huge AI nerd, so I've tried like everyone. For me, Circle Back is like the best AI note-taking tool. It's a new one out of Y Combinator, and it's really, really solid. Fireflies was what I used before that.
Yeah, I think Fireflies has been pretty common, but yeah, good note if anyone wants to take a note of that and give it shot, it's definitely worth it, and it will for sure help you with the same consistent issue of like what's happening with the tasks. That will just send out a summary note, and you don't need an extra person put in place. Anyone else? Okay, perfect. Thank you. I'll just move on to the next slide. Performance management. So we talked about employee pulse check. Just to clarify that the two are completely different. That has more to do with the emotional and just the well-being of the individual that you just onboarded, and how comfortable they are, how well they are settling into the role. Is there anything else that you can help them to help set them up for success? So when you are actually having your performance management, the feedback that was necessary to help them set up for success was already shared. And so this is directly related to the skills of the individual that you hired for the role, and of course achieving the company objectives. So as a manager, as a founder, you really need to define your objectives and KPIs, and that is pre-hiring. So hopefully you've already done that. You have a really good understanding of the role and what the responsibilities are going to be. Now, bear in mind, of course, in a startup environment, what you may think work out could be completely different post-hiring. So are my employees eligible for their bonus? How would you know that? And so in a sales run in particular, it's very, very important to have that conversation beforehand. Is this strictly commission based? Is it base plus salary? Is it base plus salary plus stock option, base plus salary plus equity? Or is it a lower tier base salary that they're going to be starting off with, but there is other equity options that you have provided them with? And so going on the basis of your gut feeling, or perhaps how happy you may be feeling on a certain day as a founder, is not going to allow you to keep things scalable. And that ties a little bit back into like culture as well, because if you're in a good mood and you may have just told someone in your admin department, and you may have done it yourself as well, to release a set number of like bonus to person A, but you don't really apply that to someone in a similar function, and they may have been longer with you in the organization, that could arise to friction and does not really set the right tone for your culture. So again, not to overcomplicate things and put a lot of like structures, because it is tough, but just documenting everything, and for you to also start having clarity that this person is sitting at the salary, and this is normally what their compensation or their bonus structure looks like, with the benefit package that you may have discussed with them, is super critical. What is the turnaround time for XYZ? So now if you have a project and you have clarity because you've worked on this before, it gives you a good objective to discuss these KPIs with the new person that you are bringing on board for the new role. So having that clarity in place whenever you're doing, hopefully every 3 months or every quarter, you're having your performance check-ins with your team members, so that when it is year end and you are objectively discussing everything that happened over the last 12 months, you've had enough pauses to reflect upon, okay, this is an area that I need improvement on, or the sales numbers are supposed to be looking like this, or the number of calls that you need to be making, or the objectives from like a features perspective, if it's a product owner, an engineer, what they should be looking like, so that you both have a healthy way of communicating things, going back to a conversation you may have had in June, and now it's September, and so you need to pick things up again. Is the person brought on to do the job? Are they actually doing it? And that ties back into the KPIs that you hopefully will have the bandwidth of discussing it with them from the get-go to help them set up for success. Bear in mind, performance management is not necessarily a way of like, today I'm upset and you took 6 months, and now this is a perfect opportunity for me to release my level of frustration, and you did not really take 1 to 6 months to communicate anything with your team member that you brought on board, because your goal is to help them set up for success, so that you're both working towards your vision. So it gets very complicated. As founders, we already wear multiple hats. You're the CTO, you're the CFO, you're the CEO, you're the COO, you're the coordinator, you're a jack of all trades. And so you could be running very thin, but just putting in, you couldn't do it within the first, every 3 months, do it every 4 months, do it every 6, but make sure that it's communicated in documentation, so that you both have it on the same page. And it's not a matter of he said, she said, well, verbally we discussed this, because it's very, very tough for anyone to keep that in mind. So AI tools, as Austin mentioned, could be super helpful, in particular during these meetings, because you both will get busy with the functions and the rest of the day with responsibilities that you have like catered to. But having it documented, again, it's something that you both can fall back to, that we did agree upon this mutually. And so what's happening with the progress, is an effective way of getting to the performance management. There's a lot of, you may also not be familiar with how do you conduct a performance management. So keeping it simple until you become familiar with it, unless you're already used to it, then you probably know what are some of the mechanisms that you can put into place. How often should I check in with my employees? So minimum once a year. But of course, it is recommended to do this every quarter, because you're just helping them set up for success, which is driving growth towards the vision of your company. Minimum annually. How? Use a scorecard. Again, no need for fancy tools at the very moment. Tool fatigue is something, just familiarizing yourself, and depending on what level of employee headcount you reach, then there could be a level of like, now it's time for us to transition over perhaps from Word documents or Excel sheets or anything else that you may be using manually, to kind of automate some of the things that we are doing, because they also help you with reminders and give you recommended questions, and keep it like a centralized place of both of you to provide your feedback as well. Use internal objective achievements. So again, be clear about the expectations that you have. Try not to surprise. And even if in the event of, again, you start a little bit later on with your performance check-ins, don't go in with a surprise that these were my expectations. Have a conversation around it. And then on the call, you can just put in a time for the two of you to meet 3 months, 4 months, 5 months down the line as well, so that you both are aware of like, this is mutually what we have agreed upon. Set clear expectations. This is not just post hiring. Set clear expectations from the get-go when you start engaging with your talent. That mentally prepares them and allows them to know what type of a role they're setting their foot into, what type of a work environment they are entering, what are your realistic expectations. And that just helps you, again, set up both parties for success. Try to be fair. Be practical, be again realistic. There could be circumstances that added, maybe not to the KPIs. Product features could have had changed, timelines could have had changed. There's other teams and the departments that are involved as well. So performance management can get a little bit tricky. And again, try not to use any biases. Effort is attractive, but it's a two-way street. And especially in a startup environment, you want to create that safe, collaborative environment by ensuring you are recognizing everybody's efforts without necessarily, and sometimes it could be unintentional, that you may be recommending or preaching one person, but try to recognize everybody's efforts. Some people love, CTOs maybe are more into like coding, and if you're more of a CEO founder like led organization, then maybe numbers may speak to you, but it really is team effort that's going to drive you towards your vision and mission. Best practice for management, for performance management policies. So self-evaluations, again, both ways. And I love the example that Mark provided, that I also get a scorecard back. It's equally for us as startup founders also critical to have room for improvement that ties back into our culture, our mission, our values, and also what are your core cultural values. Peer evaluation. So again, this is only recommended for managers. Manager evaluations, also very, very critical to know that the manager you have appointed, are they also adapt? Are they also capable of managing and leading the team members? Sometimes there could be a question of perhaps a high turnover rate in a particular department, if you have one, or a high turnover rate in a particular function. And so it's kind of like taking a step back and trying to figure out why that's happening, especially if your compensation is reasonable, your benefits package is reasonable, your job description is making sense with the title that you've put out there. It's critical to like reevaluate and just do check-ins with yourself as an organization as well when things are not working out, instead of just tossing strategies without knowing the why first. Client evaluation. How are you assessing your clients or customer satisfaction? That again ties back into like, are you on the right roadmap? for the product or the idea or the organization that you're working towards, because at the end of the day you're trying to find and you're trying to create and cater to a solution to where you may have identified a gap, but collecting the feedback from your clients equally is important, because at the end of the day you are creating a product for them, but also knowing, hey, short survey, again, something similar to an MPS. How is our customer success manager, and how do you find the level of engagement? And that provides outsiders feedback as well, and will allow room for improvement for both parties, you as an organization, as well as the individual. Talent management. Uh, Again, it's kind of like the employee pulse check and then performance management. It's not just about attracting, it's not just about a job description, it's a combination of different things that go under talent management. Biggest one is, of course, retention. So attracting talent and retaining talent is the biggest objective in like a startup, but how can you make that change? So I normally break it down into 3 different functions. Attracting talent is one thing. Employer branding, why should people work for you? And so one great example that Mark gave was from internships or co-op opportunities that you have. Try to leverage that. If they are okay with providing a written testimonial or a video testimonial, if you have the capability of having a creative team that can assist you with that, super helpful, super critical, because it's credibility and it just builds that trust that, okay, this is probably an organization I'm willing to, consider, especially in startups, because not you are taking a shot on your idea, and also the individuals that are trying to join you as an organization are also risking joining a startup without necessarily that level of security that they may get at an established or an enterprise organization. Recruitment, super critical. Is your job description accurate? There's job posting and then there's a job description, and so the 2 functions are a little bit different. But what we're talking about over here is, if you are hiring for a finance coordinator, please review it and ensure that the roles and responsibilities do actually reflect that of a finance coordinator, and not someone of a high level financial analyst, and it could be intentional, someone of like a high level CFO, because you will start questioning, well, why am I not attracting the right type of talent? The years have to properly reflect the individual that you're hiring for. The compensation package have to reflect, and so your goal at the end of the day is to fill the role up that you are trying to like hire, rather than squeezing in a finance coordinator as a title, but realistically it really reflects that of a CFO. There's legalities around that as well. Misclassification. Happy to discuss that with you if you have any questions about that offline. Retaining talent. What are you offering? And so, as a startup, there is not really a lot that you can offer if we're referring to tangible, which is really directly the compensation or the benefits package that you may have. What are in addition? Do you have maybe lunch and learns? Is there other creative cultural engagements or activities? What opportunities is there for growth? Because it's one of the best environments, not an environment made for everybody, but one of the best environments where you really get exposure to everything on a flat level. Like you have access to founders, C-levels, VPs, directors. And so your exposure to a learning environment is great, but how do you utilize that and convert that into perhaps lunch and learn? So the more you can showcase that, especially if it comes through a testimonial, you can put that on like Glassdoor, again with the consent, LinkedIn testimonials. It will really lead to attracting that talent, but you also have a portion to play, and that's more part of the onboarding. One is the attracting, so the interface when you start engaging with talent. The other one is post hiring, which is onboarding and training. Do you have an onboarding process? It's not meant to overcomplicate, and it's also not meant to, well, I need this tool, and so this tool is going to help me get to ABCD. It's just a simple process, as maybe an orientation, onboarding slide deck that just covers your organization, your purpose, your mission, your culture. Keep in mind, Canada is diverse, and so are you addressing that as well? And do I feel inclusive? Do I feel like I belong in this environment, or is it just like, getting things done? What does training mean in this role? And this ties back into a combination, I would say, of both employee pulse checks in addition to performance management. Did you give them the proper training that they needed? Did they have adequate time to go in with the training to be set up for success? Did they have access to you or the manager that was managing them with the questions, and were the questions answered? So it's a two-way street. It goes hand in hand, but statistically, it's, I believe, between 70 to 80% that if an onboarding is conducted in the right manner, it increases your retention rate by 70 to 80%. So it's super critical. It doesn't need to get complicated, but just ensure that you are practical and realistic with the timelines, with the technical assessments that they need to do, settle in, understand your organization better, and especially if you're remote first, how do you bridge the gaps between your vision, your mission, the other team members, as well as what their what your expectations are of the role they've been brought on board for. So your goal should be to help them set up for success. Growth and development, again, mentorship. How can the team members learn from each other? There's a lot of great initiatives that you can initiate over here. It doesn't always have to be an outsider or costly lunch and learns, making them inclusive part of the decision making. I call it, for example, when we have our get-togethers, tourists in your own city, and so everyone drops in where they would prefer to go for that month, and so that's the choice. So it's not necessarily, hey, we're meeting up over here, because we also have to be mindful of where the team is located, and your goal is as many as, especially if it's in a hybrid or semi-remote setting. Offering cross-functional assignments that creates empathy, belonging. You understand and realize more, okay, sales team is not just responsible for doing demos all day. There's a little bit more that goes into it, from agreements, MSAs, updating HubSpot or any other CRM that they're utilizing. And same goes for like, oh, okay, and we can't just overpromise on a sales call because we are excited, because the engineering team is already working on feature A, and so we have to be mindful and keep them in the communication. Intra-departmental trainings, lunch and learns are super, super critical. We have a work buddy system in place. Some of you may already utilize that, and we normally try not to get someone from the same department because you're already going to be working with them. So it's normally a person from another department, just so the two can start interacting and just learn more about their roles and functions within an organization. Performance reviews tied to growth, so promote motivation. If there is going to be a delay to something that you may have verbally offered, please ensure that you communicate that to them, because again, it leads to the level of transparency and just establishing that trust without putting now a doubt into my head as an employee. But we discussed this, and I do see that the sales numbers are at this level, but I didn't really get that promotion that I was promised, because they don't have access to your financial reports. And so you may be investing or at the point of like break even that you may not necessarily disclose to like your team members, but always ensure that you communicate to create that level of trust and transparency. Quick Q&A, curious to know what you guys think. Can you conduct checks on candidates before external offer? I guess you guys can all say true or false, and then I will showcase the answers to it, but just curious to know what your thoughts are around this. There's no right or wrong, so don't be shy. I'm happy to display the answers.
So I'm guessing, Viral, we're going to go with the first one first, right?
Yes.
Mark, go ahead.
Has anyone actually ever done that? Curious to know.
For the first one, I would say yes. I think background checks is a prudent thing to do, and it seems to be an industry practice all the way up to the top levels of government. I think it's about risk management and fit management for the employee that you're going to bring onto your team, that they could be there for a very long time. And I think because work is very meaningful, not only to the business that hires, but to the person that gets that job. So I think it's prudent to have background check.
It is true. I completely agree with like your thought process. However, it's false. You cannot conduct a background check before extending an offer because you need their consent for this. And so oftentimes it is conditional within, there's a portion that should be covered within an employment agreement that your offer, although it is extended, is conditional once we have conducted the background check. So you need it, you need permission from the employee before you can go ahead and conduct it.
Okay.
Can you terminate an employee for inappropriate personal social media posts? And so this has nothing to do with their job function. It's just how they, I suppose, live their life personally. And this was very interesting. Facebook was new way back.
I have personally seen people who were denied offers of employment because of their social media posts. I've seen the opposite.
They've been denied posts.
Yes.
So a decision has been made based on their personal social media posts.
Absolutely. I've seen it. I've done background checks with people like doing their own discovery and seeing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I warn them. And it's not just that I've seen it, but other people that I've known in the HR business, they look. And that's one of the things that Facebook does, unfortunately, provide to HR people.
Yeah. It's a very touchy and interesting subject, and highly debatable and subjective to a lot of people. And so, to your point, Alina, it's just going to showcase all the answers. So I'll just ask the last one: is a verbal job offer legally binding in Canada?
I think yes.
So showcasing all the answers. My laptop. I don't know if it's my laptop or the internet. So the first one is false. You cannot, as explained, just run a background check without the consent of the candidate. An employer cannot terminate you for your personal social. So there's lawsuits, obviously, and this is kind of more like the overlap between HR and legal. And a verbal job offer is legally binding in Canada. Verbally, you can be tried under common law practices. So Employment Standards Act is one, common law is one, and then you have the human rights function. And there are cases and times where you can be tried under all three, depending on obviously what the situation was and what the employee's intention, as well as, of course, the employer's intention are. Another thing to note that if there is a lawsuit and you've been fined for 50,000, it will also go on your public records as an employer. So you want to be really, really mindful when you are into certain situations. Sometimes what you think is saving you money and you don't want to get in touch with an employment lawyer could cost you a lot more in the long run. So depending on what situation you are in, definitely seek that consulting at the very least. I think it's usually a free one-off consultation with an employment lawyer or someone that deals with employment law issues. Culture versus strategy. So we talked a lot about different functions from you as a founder to your founding team members, your leaders, your managers, as well as your employees. Culture and strategy go hand in hand. And so therefore it's a versus and it's not an and. So establishing clear goals, optimizing workflows, centralizing data management, nurturing a positive workplace atmosphere, and to something that Austin covered, as well as I suppose, Mark, in summary, is that safe and collaborative environment. It does not always mean that you have to get fancied up from the get-go, of course, by mandate, by ESA Employment Standards Act. There are certain policies that you need to absolutely release within your organization as soon as your employees are onboarded, including having a signed employment agreement. Please don't have people starting your work without having your agreements put in place, and that's aside from your NDAs and, of course, the policies that you need to share with them. The environment enables, of course, maximum productivity, which is your goal at the end of the day as a founder, without the necessity of expanding organizational overhead costs with like additional headcount. I think what is really critical with, again, going culture versus your strategy is the workforce planning. Do you really need X number of employees? Do you also need these employees to be at that level of seniority? Or can you work with interns? Can you work with independent contractors? Can you work on a project basis on certain functions before you reach that level of, now I do need to bring certain functions in-house, or I need to transition certain functions from part-time to full-time? And one of the best ways, especially if you're not too sure with the role, is co-ops and internships. It really gives you a good opportunity into understanding, and you can take your time. It does not mean you to hire or start engaging with the first select few students that you've interacted with. You can take your time and really connect. There's amazing student talent out there that's available through different programs. Unpaid placements. We do recommend an honorarium at the end of the term. And they deliver phenomenal work if you help them set up for success. It's just, again, asking yourself the why. Are you clear about the role that you're bringing on board? And is it really a co-op and internship? And you don't expect them to be a mini founder. You try to look for soft skills that are very similar to what you may have as a founder. So grit, versatility, adaptability, but also being realistic and practical so that you can help them set up for success. So these are some of the things to keep in mind, is workforce planning. And as we enter January, it's to be clear, where am I currently sitting at? What do I need? And how can I be lean and also operationally effective from an overhead cost perspective, and also trying to keep your team members in the loop as well, depending how big you are. I'm a solopreneur myself as well, and I know a couple of you mentioned that throughout. So it can be very lonely, but I hope you have a good outlet and a good supportive system that you can rely on for whenever you are stuck. There's someone ahead of you that you can ask for support and guidance as well. A lot of the things are new to us, and so we may not be as familiar with it. And so there is no hesitancy or I guess shame in asking for help. It's when you ask, you will get the answer that you are looking for. I recently went, and this is kind of what I will wrap it up with. I recently went to a book launch, and again, guys, no affiliation. It's just some of the things that I recommend to our clients, and would love to recommend it to you guys as well. Is we talked about the well-being of your organization, the well-being of your employees, pulse checks with your employees. But as a founder, in particular, a solo founder, how often do you do self-checks within yourself? We lead to burnout. Timing is of essence, no doubt. And again, I kind of stay away from the term work-life balance. It is a little bit tougher, but there should be a level of harmony. I encourage a level of harmony. And it's similar to skincare. If any of you guys use skincare over here, mental health check-in with yourself also could be very different. Journaling may work for me. It may not work for someone else. Jogging may work for someone else. A cold shower, cold bath. There is a lot of different outlets, but I highly, highly recommend. This is going to be personally my last read of the year when I go to the cottage, unplug. And it's an example that if any of you guys do know Cherry Rose Tan, she lost her brother to burnout. It's a real thing. It's not often spoken about. Again, timing is of essence in a startup environment, but there is also check-ins that you need to do within yourself. So this book kind of relates back to breaking stigma, checking in on yourself, navigating the pressure of building and leading organizations, including yourself. So the question starts with me, myself, and I, and just communicating it effectively. So just going back to having outlets that you can rely on. It doesn't always have to be an HR. You can have a friend and you can just say, hey, today I just need a lending ear. Can I talk about point A, B, C, D? And so you will feel a lot better. And as I said, this is very, very personal. What may work for me may not work for you, but I would encourage putting in mechanisms for yourself as much as you are putting it in for your team members. And that will allow you to be more actively present for your team members and kind of better set the tone for your culture. Because if you are in check, then you are better capable of putting things into check for your organization and your team members as well. Thank you all for listening. I hope it's interactive enough. I would love to leave this session now more open-ended for a Q&A. And I hope you guys benefited from this, of course.
Thank you so much, Viral. This was fantastic, especially how you concluded it, and the book that you shared. I think that's a fantastic resource, and very, very well said. A founder can only take care of a team so much if they're not taking care of themselves. So, great tip there. So, thank you for that. Let's open the room up for questions for Viral. Austin, go for it.
Guys, I have a question. Any services that provide, so you mentioned earlier that survey feature, like doing an NPS. I was wondering if, so at my last job, they had like a pulse survey, it was called, which seemed like pretty like expensive probably, but it did that. Like you had your surveys that would go out and would kind of roll up and across teams. Are you familiar with any like maybe more startup friendly or lower budget friendly type of ways to do NPS, or is it really just like MailChimp or like a form that you can just send out?
No, I think like if we use Google Workspaces as an example, it can be something as simple as a form. And so you just build it on the basis of a scale, transparently share that this is not anonymous so that they are comfortable enough with providing you with that scale. And it's already a part of like your package. Very simple, I would say, free forms that are available out there. If any of you guys are already using an HRIS, so Bamboo HR, Collage HR, Humi, those, depending on what package you are at, an NPS is normally included with the cost of it. So definitely look into it, because like sometimes we get into with an organization and we see so many tools and platforms that they have, but nothing is being utilized. So ensure that whatever platform you are choosing, you are going to utilize everything that is a part of it. Thank you. Mark.
Yes, Farrell, this is a very great presentation and very insightful. I have a question around burnout, especially not just for myself, but also with employees that work for me. Sometimes, they'll want to please me or they'll go the extra mile. How do you manage the expectations versus the expectations versus the reality? Like, how do you manage that? Or how would one
So when
manage
you
that?
say leading, so leading to like, is that on a clarity? Like, is that on a positive note when you said like they're trying to please you? So do you feel that they are reaching that level of like burnout and they shouldn't?
Trying to prevent it, trying to avoid it, like to set the manageable, realistic expectations for them.
I think the employee pulse check, again, it doesn't have to be named an employee pulse check. And I think you said you already have something implemented
Yeah.
within that. Oftentimes, and it's a great question, there's a lot of the behind the scenes, which is in our personal lives, things that could be going
Mhm.
on. And
Yes.
I had one intern that I can give as an example. And it was literally what you said, that trying to impress, because that's the culture that they come from. So bear in mind, Canada is very
Mhm.
diverse. And so did you kind of educate them on the cultural behaviors and expectations now that they are part of Canada or part of like your workforce? And
Mm.
so we got on a call and he's coughing and really, really unwell. So I'm like, hey, is
Wow.
everything okay? And it's like, well, I have my midterms, I have my part-time job, and I have this, so I'm just feeling a little bit unwell. And so that to me was like, oh my God, why did you not, never reach out? Though we like
Yeah.
encourage it all the time. And so the expectation is like, we have virtual activity calls. So when we start off, it's normally with a note
Mm.
of how's
Yeah.
everyone doing? Is everyone doing okay? Just reiterating it through your culture that we really care about your well-being. And so if there is something that we need to be aware of, if you cannot approach the founder, please try to reach out to someone within the organization that you feel
Mm.
comfortable enough and they can relay it to the founder. Because again, culturally, it could be very different based on the organization that you come from. And so it's that boss employee relationship. And in a startup,
Mhm.
you want to set the tone of like, I am approachable. Yes, it is work. We all have expectations. We are all working towards a vision. However, your health and your priority comes first. Sometimes we'll just surprise our employees or implement the same for our clients as something as small as
Mhm.
an Uber gift card. hey, thank you so much for the amazing work that you did. Here's our token of appreciation, especially with your unpaid co-ops and placements. We're all on tight budgets. I think they understand that, and they're excited to get this real life hands-on opportunity. But what are some of the other ways you are incentivizing that? And so you get beautiful messages that just reinforce that, okay, I'm on the right path of, like, culture. I hope that
Thank you for that.
answers your question.
Yeah, that was very good. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, no problem.
There's a question in the chat as well. Sorry, Faral, go ahead.
Yes. No, just one thing. There is no right or wrong question. Again, feel free to drop it in the chat, but I really encourage you to ask your question. And sometimes there could be another founder on this call that may have the same question as you. Of course, you can always reach out to me offline, but I definitely encourage you to ask your questions over here.
Yeah, 100%. Perfect. The question in the chat is it possible to share some information about the basic legal requirements for HR practice?
I could, and I am happy to connect with you offline for that, but it's the public resources that are available. It's just the language that becomes a little bit tricky. So depending on what province you are, there's the federal, so the CRA, which has the Human Rights Code covered over that. And then provincially, it is the Employment Standards Act. So a lot of the legislations or legalities that you are looking for, you can find it all over there.
Kat, go ahead.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It was really interesting. I got a lot out of it. My question was more about creating HR policies and whether if there are any templates that I can use to work off, or that we can use to work off of. Anything like that. I mean, I've just kind of been using AI and just kind of to get some ideas. I know it's tailored to each each company, but yeah.
I would recommend a one-time investment into your policies, and that could include your agreement, your NDAs, policies that are needed. I would definitely stay away from AI or any free forms that you can find on the Google outlets out there. There are legalities around that. There is certain terminologies, certain languages that you need to have covered, and depending on what industry it is that you're operating towards, it's very custom. So I would not recommend AI or any type of tools. Again, the public websites that are available over there, you just have to try to make sense. It could be a little bit more time consuming. There is and again, happy to connect, and we're not affiliated or anything, but just drop in some recommendations of perhaps lawyers that look into this, and they offer one-time packages for you. Even when we start working with clients, it is recommended for your agreements. We do a second scan just to ensure that, hey, this is not really making sense. Why did they put that? You're in this province, and so it's not applicable. Lawyers can also, have oversights, but the first step is to get it from someone legal that's actually well-versed within this area. Because if you do have a poor termination, and not by fault or intentionally, you want to make sure that you have the right documents in place, because those lawsuits sometimes can be extremely costly. So it's just preventing yourself. Buying insurance is what I call it.
Faral, I have a question for you as well. So we often hear this phrase like hire slow, fire fast. And for a lot of first-time founders, especially who are stepping into leadership roles for the first time, when they hire a wrong person into a role, they feel obligated almost at times to carry on with that person, and that affects, of course, the business as well. So how would you navigate termination, especially as an early stage startup where you want to keep the business as lean as possible as well, so you can't have additional people on the team anyway?
It's a great question, and it ties back into the whole workforce planning that I guess we touched upon in the last slide, is to really understand what are the roles that I need, because you also have to keep in mind, the more team members you onboard, and depending on what layer and how your organizational structure is currently set up, you're also responsible for managing these. And so looking into their reports and looking into their work quality, it does not necessarily meant to make your life easier. What you can and should delegate as a founder is very critical, but try not to overstaff yourself, because that happens in in startups when you get excited and you see this pool of like, oh my God, I didn't know like unpaid, co-op placements exist. And now you have 12 co-ops and you're like, oh, I don't really know how to manage them. And so that leads to like burnout as well for yourself, for the co-ops that you have, brought on board. And so it is a great concept. It's take it as you see fit. Again, my recommendation always is ask. Try to find an outlet. If you're not part of an outlet, try to develop that outlet, especially if there is members that are part of your community. I think you guys have great resources that they can tap into before making that hiring decision. Because bear in mind, you also don't want to become that brand. So this goes back to employer branding, where if you are tapping into a pool of talent that are co-ops, like, yeah, this organization you might want to stay away from. I remember, and this is years back, Waterloo Co-ops, one of the most popular like engineers that everybody wants to tap into, they have their own internal portal where whenever one of the co-ops gets an opportunity from employer A, and so they're like, hey, has anyone worked with this employer? And so you would be surprised to know that people actually are very blunt and straight up. And it's like, this is an employer you want to stay away from. And at that point, maybe you've raised funding, maybe you're post revenue and you have a really good lucrative compensation package to offer. But because your culture is now deteriorated and you have a set type of a brand associated to you, it's going to take you a really long time to like work your way back and start having people speak highly of you in your absence. Because at the end of the day, as an employer, you are also a brand. So it's very, very critical to keep that in mind. It's not just about, oh my God, I have access to like an economical pool of like, talent, and I'm just going to go crazy with all the hiring that I need. You need a proper workforce planning in place. Is this making sense? Can I handle this workload? Am I in a position to train them and set them up for success? Because your success, their success, it all ties back into the vision of your organization. So be very mindful before getting excited into, oh my God, I'm just going to like, start hiring and that's going to make life easier. You are responsible for them.